Oh my gosh. So back in the day, I made a room tour video. I say back in the day, it was probably before Last Jedi came out. So 2017, if not earlier. And in that tour, I showed off my collection. Well, none of that, all but one book of that collection still exists. They all got burned in a fire, as many of you know. I survived one of the worst wildfires in California's history. So over the last pushing 5 years, I've been rebuilding my collection and collecting new things. For instance, I didn't really collect novelizations till after the campfire. And I wanted to do a series of videos where I break down container by container, shelf by shelf my collection. Because where I live now, I have my books spread out all over the place. The only main place is in my closet where I have all my mass market paperbacks. I don't put those out on shelves. Reason being, they take up a lot of space. These containers used to be for under my bed, but my fiance and I switched to a different bed frame that doesn't allow these to go under the bed. So they get stacked in my closet. But I've been going through them because I have a lot of duplicates to things. And I want to get different books, so I've been swapping things out. And I thought, well, it might be the time to finally do a collection tour. And I'm just going to break these up randomly, maybe one of these a month, ending with my Star Wars collection, because that's going to be a hard one to put together, so I'm saving it for last. But I decided to start with a book series that I'm getting back into. I'm actually going to re-review 3 book reviews because I was not satisfied with how they turned out at the time. But they did very well, and that's my Dragonlance Chronicles reviews. I've been a Dragonlance fan since high school. It's what got me really into Dungeons & Dragons for a time. I actually met one of the creators, Margaret Weiss, at Gen Con. It was a great time. I've talked about this before on a number of streams and podcasts. But anyway, we're going to get into some Dragonlance. Now, this isn't my complete Dragonlance collection. I actually ordered some things that have not arrived yet. They're all hardcovers, though. All of the mass market paperbacks that I just ordered arrived this morning, as well as one hardcover. And I have a cat. One of my cats is just going crazy in a container, being a weirdo. That's why I'm filming in the living room. Maybe she'll show her face on camera, maybe she won't. We'll see. Anyway, so we're going to start with the one hardcover I do have here. And this is the 2003 printing of Dragons of Autumn Twilight, the first of the Chronicles series by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. It's got a little water damage to it. Not in the best of shape, but when you find the Chronicles or the Legends series in hardcover, I highly recommend picking them up. No matter the printing, they go for a lot of money. And not a lot of Dragonlance got printed in hardcover. A lot of these are mass market paperback exclusives. And including this series wasn't printed in hardcover at first. To my knowledge, it was only mass market paperbacks. In fact, I have the original printings, or an very early printing of them. So here's Dragons of Autumn Twilight. This is what it used to look like. They've changed the cover up a few times for this trilogy and the next trilogy, and a couple others that Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman wrote. This is Volume 2, Dragons of Winter Night, which I am about halfway through. Then, lastly, Dragons of Spring Dawning. It's a solid trilogy. I highly recommend reading them. They're well worth your time. They're very fast reads. Next, we move on to the Legends trilogy. We got Time of the Twins, War of the Twins, which I actually just found this. I bought a lot of these a while back before I moved to this house. And then I just didn't collect Dragonlance for a while. And then I decided to read these, and I realized that I didn't have War of the Twins. And I was like, oh God. Because I'm going through these really quickly. Sorry. Pixie, my calico, is just wild for no reason. Lastly, we got Test of the Twins. Yeah. Pixie normally takes a nap at this time. They both take naps at this time, which I thought it was safe to take a break from work and film, and it's not. So anyway, moving on to the Tales series. We got the first Tales series. Now, there were 2 Tales trilogies, which I don't know. Oh, I see. And I just put them together. There's a couple trilogies where they made sequel trilogies to them, and I've just, for the sake of this video, put them all together, even though some of them came out a few years after. So let's get into Tales, Volume 1, The Magic of Kryn. Volume 2, which is Kender, Gully Dwarves, and Gnomes. And with a lot of these early Dragonlance books, they're pretty easy to find because they got printed a few times. And a lot of the ones I have happen to be first prints. First or second prints. Most of my collection of Dragonlance is the TSR publication ones, which they were the first publishers of Dragonlance. Then it was Wizards of the Coast, and now Del Rey prints Dragonlance books, which is very weird to me. But here's Tales Volume 3, Love and War. Always liked that cover. There's Pixie. Pixie, say hi. You're not going to say hi? Oh, Lord. Okay. Now we move on to Tales 2. And this is Volume 1, The Reign of Istar. Volume 2, The Cataclysm. I love these TSR covers. There's something classic about them. The art really starts to change in the mid-90s when Wizards of the Coast takes over. And they're fine. Some of them are fine. Others aren't. I shouldn't say the mid-90s. More like the late 90s, early 2000s. Some of the covers are hit or miss. But here's Tales 2, Volume 3, The War of the Lance. Now we move on to the Preludes. I wonder if I have these all grouped together. I do have them grouped together. But here's the first set of Preludes. Now you might be confused when collecting these because it seems to me that they republished the Preludes, both series, and made it one series, which is fine. It deals with the main characters from the Chronicles series. It's sort of a prequel before their actual prequel. Well, not. It's after the meeting of the Sextet. I think it's Sextet. It's like octuplets, kind of hard to say. That's like their meeting, like that's their like origins of all of them. But this is sort of what they were doing in the 5-year span before the Chronicles. So we got Darkness and Light, which is the one I'm really interested in reading because I've never read the Preludes. And the thing with these, they're not written by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. This is when they took a back seat for a while. And they came out with a book, well, 2 books, but I don't have one of them, in the 90s. Go. My cat just bit me. She's rubbing on the books and knocking them over. Go on. Go. Go. And she knocked them over. Okay. Thanks, Pixie. You're a real help. Anyway, so this one's written by Darkness and Light is written by Paul B. Thompson and Tanya R. Carter. Then we got Kendermore, written by Mary Kirchhoff. This one I just got today. It is Volume 3, Brothers Magier, written by Kevin Stein, and it does have an introduction from Margaret Weiss. So that's nice. Now we move on to Preludes 2. We got Riverwind the Plainsman. It's kind of a metal cover, which is written by Paul B. Thompson and Tanya R. Carter. Then we got Flint the King, written by Mary Kirchhoff and Douglas Niles. And then lastly, we have Tanis the Shadow Years, written by Barbara Siegel and Scott Siegel. So, these, the Preludes, Tales, and the Heroes series have all been reprinted, and they got really wild covers that I'm not a fan of. I like the older versions of them. They're just they feel like Warhammer or Warhammer 40K. It's like riffing off of that, and it doesn't feel Dragonlance to me. So I have older printings because I prefer those covers. Next, we're going to move on to the First Heroes trilogy. Well, I thought a putty cat. I can't speak. It's been too long since I did a video. So we're going to move on to the First Heroes trilogy with The Legend of Huma, which this is the one, out of all the Heroes books, this one got a comic book adaptation through IDW. Not a lot of Dragonlance books got that, but this was the last one they did. So this is written by Richard A. Knack. You know, the greatest game ever, Knack. Stormblade by Nancy Varon Berberick. I don't know. I don't know how to speak English, even though it's my primary language. I don't think anyone does. Let's be real. Then we got Weaver's Luck by Michael Williams. Now we move on to Heroes 2, which I think this also got rebranded as just a 6-book Heroes series later. Got Kaz the Minotaur, who's a kind of a fan favorite character. He shows up randomly, but this is, I think, his first appearance. Which this is written by Richard A. Knack. The Gates of Thorbarden, written by Dan Parkinson. That would suck if your name was Parkinson's. Oof. And then Volume 3 is Galen Burke Knighted by Michael Williams. Now we move on. So these are all series I have all the books for. Going forward, it's going to be hit or miss, more miss than hit. This is the stuff I'm really working on right now, collecting wise, because I got a solid start for like months of reading before I have to actually buy stuff that I'm missing. Now we're moving on to the meeting of the Sextet, which is a 6-book series that I only have 5 of. So I got, once again, these aren't written by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, even though it's their characters. And I'm really curious about this. I know people like these, but it gets me worried. We got Kindred Spirits, written by Mark Anthony and Ellen Porath. I don't know how to speak. We got Wanderlust, which is book 2, written by Mary Kirchhoff and Steve Winter. Book 3, Dark Heart, written by Tina Daniel. The Oath and the Measure, written by Michael Williams. Steel and Stone, written by Ellen Porath. So, there we go. And then there's The Companions is the last one, and I don't have that at the moment. Next, a trilogy I do have all the books to. It's the Elven Nations trilogy. There's been 2 elf trilogies This was the first one. I don't have the Elven Exiles trilogy. I don't have any of those. So we got Firstborn, which is by Paul B. Thompson and Tanya R. Carter. The Kinslayer Wars, written by Douglas Niles. And The Qualinasti, written by Paul B. Thompson and Tanya R. Carter again. Interesting. Next, we got the Dwarven Nations trilogy, which I'm missing the third book of. And with some of these, once we get into more of the Wizards of the Coast era, they don't number them. And my list of the Dragonlance books I have is on the phone that I'm recording on. So, I know, not professional, but boo-hoo, I don't care. So, here's the Dwarven Nations trilogy, this is book 1, The Covenant of the Forge, written by Dan Parkinson. Book 2, Hammer and Axe, written also by Dan Parkinson. So I wonder if he wrote the third one. That'd be nice to have one of these trilogies that's just written by the same author. Keep consistency going. Unless your author's Chuck Wendig. Next, we move on to the Villain series. And like with the Meeting of the Sextet, this was made as a 6-book series, not 2 trilogies. And these are really like the villains from the Chronicle series. You'll notice that for the most part in these TSR books, like the 80s and early 90s, they really stuck with either telling legends from the Chronicle series or dealing with the Chronicle series characters themselves. So this is the Villain series. I have 3 of these. This is book 1, Before the Mask, written by Michael and Terry Williams. Then we got The Black Wing, written by Mary Kirchhoff. And that's book 2 there. I don't know if I said that or not. And then we skip to book 4, Hedrick the Theocrat, written by Ellen Dodge Severinson. Next, we move on to the Lost Histories, this is a 6-book set that I only have the first 3 of. And I don't have them all in the same printing, because this is when things are more difficult to find, is sort of in this era. Moving forward, they get a little harder to come by. So here's the first book. This is, I think, a first printing. This is the Qualinasti, written by Douglas Niles. The Urda, written by Linda P. Baker, my bad. And then the Dragonlance, written by Paul B. Thompson and Tanya Cook. All right. Into the second pile, only one more pile to go. This is actually, 3 of these are ones I just picked up today. Well, just arrived today. This is the Warrior series. It's another 6-book series that's sort of like side characters from the earlier books. This is Knights of the Crown, written by Ronald Green. That's book 1, I should say. And then book 2, which is the only other one I have, is the Marquesta Carthorne. Oh yeah, she's a character that's in Dragons of Spring Dawning. This is written by Tina Danielle. I didn't realize this existed. I didn't realize this series. So here's the thing with Dragonlance. There's probably about 150-ish books at this point. And Dragonlance has really slowed down since this is all, for the most part, this is late 80s, 90s books. There are some stuff from the 2000s I have here, but Dragonlance really stopped being popular in the 2000s. And less of this sort of thing came out. So that's why they become a little more scarce and a little more expensive to get. But anyway, now we move on to the Lost Legends. I only have 1 of these books, which happens to be Volume 1, which is Venus Solemnis, written by, it's either an I or a J, I can't quite tell. Can you tell? We're going to go with J. Robert King. I don't know. I'd have to do more research. Now, this was Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman's big return, which is the second generation. This is the beginning of the Chaos War. And this series is really confusing, because the second generation is a standalone book. That's how it was written. It deals with primarily with the children of our main characters from the Chronicles and Legends series. It's also like the Vector Prime, for you Star Wars fans. You know what I mean, for Dragonlance. This upset a lot of people. And then they made Dragons of a Summer's Flame, or Dragons of Summer's Flame, which is considered the fourth book in the Chronicles series, even though I would argue that it should be book 2 of the Chaos War, because it is the Chaos War. And we're going to get into the Chaos War series, which is, honestly, it's people adding details to these 2-book series, which are very unpleasant 2-book series. So, here we go. This is books, as I recall, books 3, 4, and 5 of the 6-book Chaos War series that fills in second generation Summer's Flame. This is Tears of the Night Sky, written by Linda P. Parker and Nancy Faria Berberic. The Puppet King, written by Douglas Niles. Reavers of the Blood Sea, written by Richard Knack. These are some that I have a hard time finding these, the Chaos War in particular, in any sort of decent shape. I mean, that's borderline not great. But with the Chaos War, it's just a pain. Also, this is right around the time I think we switched to these being, they're TSR, but it's a matter of time before we switch to Wizards of the Coast. Because TSR, to my knowledge, does not exist anymore. But here are 2 of the Bridges of Time series. I don't know which 2, because they stopped numbering these. The Rose and the Skull, written by Jeff Crook. And then Legacy of Steel, written by Mary H. Herbert. And this pile took a nosedive. Pixie decided to play with it. Now, moving on to Dragons of a New Age, which I think is a companion to the War of the Souls, which I don't have any of those, but that was Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman's return to Dragonlance. They had issues with TSR, like they did with Wizards of the Coast, though I don't know if it was nearly as ugly as Wizards of the Coast, because they've been suing Wizards of the Coast for years, and it wasn't until last year that they finally got the rights to write Dragonlance again. But yeah, they had issues with TSR, and that's why they pretty much took a back seat after the Legends trilogy, and then they did the Chaos War, and as far as they did War of the Souls, and then Margaret Weis would do the Dark Disciples trilogy. Well, she would do the Wraithland Chronicles, which is right before, I think it's between the Chaos War series and Dragons of a New Age. And I think there's an Age of Mortals series too, but I don't know. I can't remember. These are all books I've not read. I just remember War of the Souls when it came out, because it was a big deal, because it came out in hardcover. And my mom was really into Dragonlance, and she got those and was like depressed reading them. So she doesn't like change. And that series is pretty dark. So yeah, Dragons of a New Age, Volume 1, which is the dawning of a new age. by Gene Rabe. And he wrote a lot. Gene Rabe wrote quite a few Dragonlance books. This is book 2 of Dragons of a New Age, which is The Day of the Tempest, also written by Gene Rabe. And I can't remember if there's 3 or 6 of those. I don't know. Then he wrote the Dahlman Saga, and I only have book 1 of this, which is Downfall. Moving on, we're really getting to the end of this stuff because we're in Wizards of the Coast territory now. We're going to go to the Minotaur Wars, which I don't have book 1, but here's book 2. And book 3 are both written by Richard A. Knack, which is Tides of Blood and Empire of Blood. And there's a tomcat howling outside. Next, a trilogy I didn't even know existed till I started researching Dragonlance stuff from the Wizards of the Coast era. These are both written by Mary H. Herbert. I'm missing book 1 of these, but this is the Lyncha trilogy. This is Flight of the Fallen. I'm not a fan of these covers. Don't get me wrong. They're drawn just fine, but they feel like they were drawn. These images were drawn separately, and then they were photoshopped together, and not very well because they look blurry. And this is Return of the Exile. And again, it's the same thing. I don't know. These are kind of a pain to find too. I just happened to get a big lot of Dragonlance books. Next, we got... I actually used to have this whole trilogy, and it's signed by Margaret Weiss, Before the Fire. This is the Dark Disciples trilogy, which she wrote by herself. And it was the first thing since War of the Souls. Tracy Hickman did not write this. This isn't the first time this has happened. She wrote the Raceland Chronicles, and Tracy Hickman, I didn't think wrote either of those. It's a duology. Because we have to chronicle everything Raceland did. Even when it's... We'll get to my opinion on how many of these books about the companions, the heroes of the Lance, there are. It's like they never had any time to rest. It's like the original trilogy characters in the Rebellion era. It's like they don't have any time to rest ever. But this is Amber and Ashes. I actually have book 2 coming in hardcover because this is one of those rare occasions where they wrote a series and it was published in hardcover. Which seems to be more a Wizards of the Coast thing. They did more hardcovers than TSR did. In fact, they reprinted things from TSR in hardcover. That Dragons of Autumn, Twilight, that's a Wizards of the Coast printing. And I think it was printed after the War of the Souls ended. I think they reprinted the Chronicles 4 books, Second Generation, and the Legends books, all in hardcover. I've seen those. And they kind of match a series we're going to get to in a second. But first, here is the Rise of Solamnia trilogy. I only have the first book. I remember when this came out. This is the Lord of the Rose, written by Douglas Niles. I remember being interested in this, and then I never bought it, and then I couldn't find it anywhere. So, I'm glad I have one of them. Then we move on to what was the last trilogy of Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman's books, The Lost Chronicles. This one is the second one, which is Dragons of the High Lord Skies. And what these behemoths were there are adventures that happen in the Chronicle series, and I'll talk about it when I review them, that are briefly mentioned, because especially the second book would be way too long. So the first book of this series was called Dragons of Dwarven Depths. and it talks about an adventure that's referenced that happens between the first two books. It's basically the Chronicles book 1.5. It's like Lion King 1.5. It's not necessary, but, you know, it exists. And then it was like they needed to write like more of them to make a trilogy. So this one is, to my knowledge, it's Kitiara's perspective on what happens in Dragons of Winter Night, but also I think it has to deal with the whole thing with the ice wall, which happens in the middle, that's barely mentioned, that happens to main characters, which I'll talk about in Dragons of Winter's Night, which is kind of irritating. And then the third one's Dragons of an Hourglass Mage, which talks about what Raceland's doing in the middle of Dragons of Spring Dawning, which that took 2 years to come out. The first two, they came out kind of back to back. Typically with these Dragonlance books, if it's a trilogy, they come out kind of like 6 months apart. So it took 2 years between the second and third books, which is kind of weird. Then lastly, the last one I have is the second book of the Org Titans trilogy, which is The Fire Rose, written by Richard A. Knack again. So this was a weird trilogy. I remember when this came out, and I don't think anyone bought it. I don't think that this time Dragonlance was really stale. Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman kind of phoned in the Lost Chronicles, I think for contractual reasons, because the Lost Chronicles came out when they tried to make the Dragonlance animated movie. They made Dragons of Autumn Twilight into a movie, and if you guys really want me to, I could probably get some people together and we can do a watch-along. It's bad. It's really, really bad and really bizarre. Because you'd think it's right up my alley as a fan of, like, heavy metal. And, like, Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings. It would be up my alley. But it's so incompetent. It's so weird. It's well acted. I won't say anything about the voice acting. I think it's really well done. I mean, they got Kiefer Sutherland's voicing Raceland. I think it's Lucy Lawless is voicing Goldmoon? I don't know. I've never seen the whole thing of it. It's well acted. It's badly animated. I mean, the Draconians are CG, but everyone, and like the dragons are CG, but everything else is hand-drawn, but it's just done sloppily. Sometimes things will be animated really well, and then other times they won't. Or my personal favorite, Lorana, changes outfits constantly because, I don't know, I guess the director said she needed to be animated in armor, so some of the stuff they reanimated with her in armor, and other times she's just wearing a dress. It's weird. It's a really weird movie. And it's one of those few movies that just only exists on DVD. I think you can stream it on Amazon Prime. I'll have to look into it. But if y'all want to, just leave a comment saying, like, hey, I want to see a stream where I make one of my friends suffer with me and we watch Dragons of Autumn Twilight. My fiance won't do that, by the way. Getting her to watch trash is a whole chore. And she's not going to sit through an animated garbage movie. Not after I made her watch The Black Cauldron. Which, that movie's awful. I don't care what you weird 80s nostalgia people think. That movie is genuinely trash. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, thank you for watching this. I know it's 34 minutes long, pushing 35. But I think it's worth your time to check out. And I think next time we'll either jump into my Aliens book collection or we'll jump into movie novelizations. Comment down which ones you would rather see. Would you rather see movie novelizations first or the Aliens books, which I would throw in the few Predator and AVP books I have as well. There really aren't that many of them, but I'll willingly throw those in. So anyway, have a good one.